Tennessee Life is sponsored by Next to New, an upscale consignment shop serving Knoxville, nexttonewknox.com, and by The Flower Pot, for over 100 years, offering flowers and same-day delivery with 2 convenient Knoxville locations, knoxvilleflowerpot.com. Coming up on Tennessee Life, a singing cowboy marks 30 years of remembering the heroes who rode onto the silver screen.
The people here have let me be what I wanted to be. That's to answer your question. They've let me be Marshal and the cowboy.
Richard Jolley is known worldwide for turning glass into sculpted works of art. We catch up with him in his Tennessee studio, where he has crafted what will be a first of its kind exhibit.
It's an opportunity of a lifetime.
Beer and college. They've always gone together as far as campus culture goes. But we're going to Brew School 101, an education on craft beer and an impact a Tennessee college is having on the industry. Those stories next on Tennessee Life.
Thanks for joining us for Tennessee Life. I'm your host, Vicki Lawson. We are so glad you are watching as we showcase the people, places, landscapes, and culture that make up our way of life, our Tennessee Life. This original program is produced right here in the Volunteer State. Tennessee Life will take you on a variety of adventures and look back at the roots of Tennessee tradition and culture. First on our program is an in-depth interview with a man who has kept cowboys and their music alive for new generations. Marshal Andy Smalls launched the idea when many thought the time for cowboys and heroes on television was long gone. But he knew there was an audience for the movies from his boyhood era, and he's been proving that every Saturday morning for 3 decades. Andy, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. And you know, you're not a Knoxville, Tennessee native, but you're certainly an icon here. Why do you think you have been so embraced by this Knoxville community?
The people here have let me be what I wanted to be. That's to answer your question. They've let me be Marshal and the cowboy. I started out as a big band singer many years, but I always wanted to do what I'm doing now, and thank God.
Well, you know, you've taken your love of Westerns and you have mixed that with traditional music. Mm-hmm. Has that been a tough sell in this market?
Not really. I thought it would be, and if I were trying to be a studio performer, it probably would have been. But in this market, the people here let me be Marshal Andy.
Take us back to the small Andy Smalls. Were you just a typical little boy that loved Westerns, and where did you see your Westerns and get your love of Westerns?
Well, I grew up in a town down on the coast of South Carolina, Georgetown, just south of Myrtle Beach, just north of Charleston. And there wasn't much to do in a town like that, except in the summers we stayed at the beach because we were right near the beach. There wasn't but one thing to do, and that's stay at the movies. And you might say my life started out on one block on Front Street with 2 theaters, the Strand and the Palace. Mm-hmm. And the Palace is where we had the double feature and the Westerns on Saturday. And I grew up there, started in 1936 and 37. And then I got to growing taller, and I got where I'd go up to buy my ticket. You could get in for 9 cents if you were under 12, and I would duck down and put my hand up so they'd think that I was under 12, but they caught me after a while. I loved it so much. My whole dreams was to be a cowboy star. That's all I ever wanted to be. And then I got a job down there. They hired me, so that way I could get in both movie houses free. And I just lived my life there.
Well, you love of the Westerns, but also the singing.
I grew up during World War II. In my hometown, we didn't have a country band like you do here in East Tennessee. It's nothing. Everybody plays the guitar just about and sings. We didn't have a Western band. We had some front porch pickers and some hay wagon pickers, you know what I'm talking about, but nothing really that could teach me what I needed to know. So if you wanted to sing during World War II, you had to sing Glenn Miller, Harry James, the Dorsey Brothers, and we happened to have a gentleman named Jack Blunt who had an 18-piece orchestra right out of high school into his adulthood, and he finally let me start singing with him when I was 18, and that's how it started. Then it was all big band music, so that's all I knew for years.
Tell me how you developed this concept for your television show. Tell me about that.
Charles Thomas Advertising Agency, in addition to having the Lost Sea down here at Sweetwater, had a little place in North Carolina, Franklin, called Gold City, up on top of the chairlift. And he asked me to go over there and manage and write the shows for one summer. And it was Western. It was all Western. So at the end of the summer, I brought the band back over here to the TVA&I Fair. And they said, well, why don't you come and do a couple of shows for us, you know, and I went out there and I did it. And I was a bad guy. I wasn't a Marshal. I played the heavy. And I walked over to the information booth where Al Curtis, who was, of course, president here for a long time, he saw my hands bleeding where I was falling and hitting the rocks. And he thought, golly, you really do that every 3 shows a day? And I got to thinking, I said, you know, this isn't making much sense. I'm writing the show. I'm going to be the Marshal. I'm going to be the good guy. I didn't say the Marshal. So he started announcing when I was going to be back on, like, be sure and go by. And he was saying, Uncle Andy, Cousin Andy, everything up until that point. And he said, well, what should I call you? He said, how about Sheriff Andy? And I thought, no, Andy Griffith is Sheriff Andy. We don't want another one. He said, how about Marshal Andy? I said, sounds good.
And it wasn't a television show at that.
No, it wasn't. I was just doing commercials around town. I just knew, and WIVK had let me go over in the afternoons and do a call-in show on the radio about old-time cowboys. And the phones lit up from 5 to 5:30. We couldn't answer them. And all of a sudden, I've got a market out there, so if I could sell someone. So I tried to sell the stations here in town, and they said it wouldn't work. Those days are gone. The day of the cowboy and the Indian and Happy Rain and all this cartoon stuff, that won't work today. This was 1970, and nobody would buy it. So finally, Channel 43 originally, they're now Fox, came to town, and they wanted to get on Channel 7. At this time now, my business life had moved around where I'd gone to work with a cable company here in town as a marketing director. Well, one of my jobs was to decide who went on what station on the locals. And we had Channel 7 open, and everybody wanted it because back in those days, you had to have a converter box to get past Channel 13. So finally, they called their corporate office down in Chattanooga and said, there's this old man up here, I was 53 at the time, he thinks he's a cowboy. We can get on Channel 7 if we do him a little show. He wants to do this show. And 2 weeks, they had never had any mail. And all of a sudden, the mail started coming in. And they said, you think we could get him 2 more weeks? So they got me 2 more weeks. And then finally, after a month, they said, just go ahead and get him movies for a year. And so that's how that happened. But it was commercial. I had to stop every 5 minutes and do a commercial. All right. Later on, I stayed there 5 years, and then Channel 26 offered me a deal. And I went over there, and they became Channel 8 while I was there. So we moved off the mountaintop and went over there to Paper Mill Road. And still doing commercials. And Al Curtis, I was singing one night with his band as a guest. And he asked me, he said, why don't you think about bringing that? I said, you mean come over to PBS? No commercials? I could show the whole movie all the way through without stopping? He said, well, we'll see. So he brought his staff together. Jim Tindall was one of them. And Richard, who's directed and produced on my show, said, let's try it. And so we've been here, and that was 24 years ago.
I know on your show you have interviewed many interesting folks. Who stands out in your mind?
Oh, good question. I'm glad you didn't forget to ask me that. Roy Acuff was a pure, true gentleman. Ben, a lot of people out there, you might say, all of a sudden we're talking about movie stars and all this and all that, and you'd say Ben Johnson. Well, some people remember Ben Johnson as a track star. Ben Johnson, that played in all of the John Wayne movies, and just absolutely great actor, looked like he was carved out of the side of the western mountains. He was just rugged. He was absolutely just exactly like what you saw on in the movies. And then the next one would be Roy Rogers. Exactly what you expect him to be. I met some others that they weren't, bad guys. They just weren't like you thought they would be. But then my all-time favorite singing songster of all times, Mr. Eddie Arnold. And Eddie and I became very, very close friends right up to his death. And he's been on this show 6 times. Roy Acuff did it 5 times. Ben Johnson did it 4 times. Roy Rogers did it twice. And just a whole lot of other people, and a lot of Nashville stars have been on the show. I think I've done 112.
Who did you not have the opportunity to interview that you would have loved to have the opportunity?
Good question. My favorite all-time action cowboy star, I'm talking about the B westerns that we show here, Johnny Mack Brown, the All-American football player from Alabama. He was a good-looking, handsome man with a southern accent and the whole thing, never lost his accent. I talked to many of his co-stars who came here to Knoxville that worked with him, said, that man, I'd ask about my favorite guy, and they'd say, you know, that was the greatest gentleman. Said when he said ma'am, the honey dripped off of his lips.
You know, one thing, Andy, that has amazed me, when you stick to something, you really stick with it to the end. And I know that applies not only in your personal life too, but in your marriage. How long have you and your lovely wife, Catherine, been married?
Well, if we make it to June 29th of this year, it'll be 57 years. 57 years. And that's another thing that I had nothing to do with. I just looked up from a dance floor. One night I looked out on the floor and she was dancing with a Citadel cadet. And I happened to know him. And this is back in the days when you could go break, you know, on someone and you'd break. You do that today and you might get your jaw broken or something. But anyway, well, I broke and I danced with her. And then they let us, when I was singing, they would let us go back and dance with our girlfriend. So I had her at a bunch of dances after that. And
well, she is a remarkable lady, and she has really stood by your side throughout your career.
During that time, and also one of the things that I would wish on my worst enemy is to lose a child, and she's been with me thick and thin, and we've lost two of our children in two separate accidents. And what a rock she is. Makes me almost cry when I talk about how lucky I am to have her.
You are a lucky man. You've had a blessed life.
Yes.
You truly have. Andy, thank you so much for sharing your Tennessee life with us. Now, we would be honored if you would do your sign off today.
Oh, we'd be glad to. This is Marshal Andy. Till we meet again next week. Just remember this, folks. If you don't wear a white hat, please wear a smile so we can tell you from the bad guy. See you next week.
Later on Tennessee Life, a new degree is on tap in our state. This college will soon graduate its first class in brewing science. But first, we enter the studio of a master glass artist and sculptor. Richard Jolley's latest creation pushes the limits of size and space.
The eyes of the art world are focused on Tennessee with the debut of a first-of-its-kind installation. For years, Richard Jolley has been creating works of art and glass sculptures that have been showcased around the world. Now he is unveiling what he calls the project of a lifetime. It will be a permanent installation displayed at the Knoxville Museum of Art. Tennessee Life's Stephanie Aldridge sat down with Jolley in his West Knoxville studio.
I think glass is an extremely difficult material to master. I think there's a great decorative art tradition with glass, but I think in choosing to try to be more artistic, you have to push it into the sculptural realm and look at it as pure sculpture. Holding temperature for working your glass is approximately 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
This project will have worldwide attention from the artist world, will it not?
Well, it's, you know, quote, the largest figurative glass and steel installation in a permanent situation inside a museum in the world. It's an opportunity of a lifetime, you know, to be very simplistic about it. You know, it's very few artists have the opportunity to have a patronage that would be so supportive of myself as an artist and of their community.
What does it mean to you to have this opportunity of a lifetime, as you said, here in your home state?
You know, with anything, I think you have to go outside to be appreciated, and then once that occurs, then you actually are very humbled by the fact that people in your community can appreciate what you do. The story I like to tell about that is that no one to start with liked the Eiffel Tower, and now it's the icon, you know, to oversimplify, 100 years later, now it's, you know, the icon that everyone wants to go as a tourist to in Paris. So I mean, I think there are always these things that come about that are timely, and I do appreciate that I had the opportunity. Plus, the Edward Larrabee Barnes building is a fabulous structure, and so it's a great place to spotlight art. It's called The Cycle of Life Within the Power of Dreams and the Wonder of Infinity.
Is it just a totally different mindset when you're commissioned to do something this specific, this big?
Well, I think the scale is, it is something that you really have to wrap your head around as far as how am I going to achieve this image. As far as, I think also once you get to my age, you have a tremendous confidence in yourself about how you can figure out things. I think most artists are extremely good at problem solving and visualization. So I think those are things that you just accentuate those traits that you know you have, and then just figure out how to do it. And it does take, quite a bit of dedicated concentration or full absorption.
How tight was some of the space with getting some of the pieces in and just maneuvering, fitting things into the building?
Well, basically the piece ended up being about 7.5 to 8 tons worth of work, a combination of steel and glass. Some of the small components fit in very easily. The larger components we craned over the south garden wall. We had to pop a window and doors out to put them in.
And so some of these were a pretty tight fit in the end, were they not?
They were very close, very tight. And also when we installed them, I wanted the pieces to fully fill the frame of the room, and so a number of the pieces were within an inch of the ceiling as we went through the installation process. So it's very careful installation.
You had to have been a little bit nervous with cranes and these kind of things moving your work around.
Well, I think a lot of the things we tried to design to have the duality about glass is that, as well as being extremely fragile, it's extremely strong and durable in some formats. And so the large figures are extremely strong and durable, relatively speaking, as far as the handling. I was much more worried about the marring of the patination on the steel part of these 5 large figures than I was the actual breakage of the glass. And as I jokingly say, I was the only one that broke glass during the installation, so that was good. I've had a lot of accolades. I've done things that I feel very pleased about and that sort of thing. But I think as an artist, you look to the future. You appreciate where you are, but you always look to the future. And so I personally feel that one thing does not make you. I think it's a number of things, and it's very accumulative. So I think you also, if you're too starstruck with yourself, you won't go back to work.
Knoxville Museum of Art Executive Director David Butler says he is looking forward to welcoming the world to see Jolley's works. You can see it starting the afternoon of May 4th. Well, if your son or daughter joked with you that they were going to major in beer in college, you may feel like you need to set them straight. But now it's a legitimate course of study, not just an extracurricular activity. At South College, you can major in brewing science. It's the only brewing degree program in the South, and the growing craft beer industry is creating a demand for people who really understand the science of beer.
There is beer, and then there's craft beer. Well, the beer industry has been exploding since the early 90s, and I can say this because I'm from here. It takes a while for really cool, progressive things to get to East Tennessee, and it took a while for the craft beer industry to get to Tennessee in the South in general.
Yeah, we're well on our way. If you look at what's happening across the border in North Carolina, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of beer culture being created. Southeast in general is playing catch up, which is fun for me. I used to tell people that I moved from California to the South to do missionary work in the craft brewing industry, kind of tongue in cheek, but it's actually true. I'm really kind of spreading the good word and helping to add to the culture and to the equation, but make sure that the quality stays high, and that's where the South College program comes in.
I've been involved in the beer industry for a few years, and I saw that this industry was exploding in the United States, the craft beer industry exploding in this country, and started looking at where were the brewers getting trained, or how were they getting trained. And I discovered that there was a school in Chicago and a school on the West Coast. Predominantly that was the only schools. And then looking a little bit further, there was up to a 3-year waiting list for those 2 schools. So I thought, do we need something in the South? I thought we did.
I found that I could go to school and learn to make beer. I jumped at the chance. One of my friends from home lived in Austin, Texas, moved out there with him, and it was opening the brew was kind of his dream, and he was home brewing, kind of started me on it, showed me how to do it. I moved to Asheville with him and his wife. We were doing home brewing there, and then school came around, and we kind of figured if we're going to do it, we might as well have the education, so I came here for that, and we're going to go from there. The beer scene is coming here. It's already hit all over the place, and it's now coming to the Southeast, and I'm from here, so being able to stick around here and have the education to do it meant a lot.
Most brewing schools in the United States, you have to be at least 21, and there's a long waiting list. I found South College, and it's a new program, so they're eager to have a bunch of new students. I'm actually in Hartford, Connecticut, doing a post-grad year and internship at a brewery in Bloomfield, Connecticut, and enjoying it very much. After making beer a while, the interest just kept evolving and getting bigger, and through the reading, I saw relations between science and brewing, and that opened up a whole new idea for how to relate science to something I was interested in.
I think it elevates the industry as a whole, just for the fact that there are certificates available to become a professional brewer, and gives the industry sort of a higher status all around.
Yeah, there is a great need in the industry for educational resources, with 1,000 more breweries coming on, and literally thousands of new brewers going to be needed. Right now there's only a couple of options, so we're trying to provide a very comprehensive program to service that. There's a wait on some of the more established institutions, so hopefully this will take a little bit of the pressure off of that. And really, when I started in the late 70s, it was kind of dismal in the States as far as beer was concerned. There wasn't a lot of variety, and now, short 25 years later, we're the leader on the planet in beer diversity and innovation, and it's being driven by these very passionate brewers that sometimes just need the technical background to make sure that their passion translates to the public and the consumer.
Learning to brew beer is a very scientific endeavor. Of all the alcoholic beverage production processes, brewing beer is the most complicated. It has the most steps, the most mistakes can be made, including getting other microbes in the beer that you don't want, or contamination. When that happens, then your beer is ruined, or it doesn't taste like it did before. So it's an extremely complicated process. In addition to just the process itself, you have to understand how the machinery works. And so we have classes in physics, and then fluid dynamics, which is basically engineering, studying how liquids move around and pressures and things like that. So not only do you learn how to brew beer, but a brewmaster needs to know how to fix this equipment and what's wrong with it, because something will happen. And so we're teaching them that also.
I thought I knew a lot about it until I came here, and the science behind it, fluid dynamics, chemistry, math, all these different things that I had no idea would be a part of it, but that can help make it that much better. I mean, you can make a beer, but if you know all the education and the dynamics behind it, you can make it as good as you want.
I think we've set the bar really high with this first class, and I expect the rest of the classes to be similar to this. I've been so impressed with really how smart these students are.
I think the general public doesn't understand all that goes into making a fine beer and all that can go wrong. So I've seen how not to do it by watching the industry go through its growing pains. But yes, very much so. I mean, the marketing would lead you to believe that if you have a good source of water and you put in enough hops, that you come out with a good product. It's really a complicated and fascinating process that combines a technical challenge with also artistic expression, like a gourmet chef.
I mean, we've seen this program 2 years ago. It was an idea, and it took a while. to convince the folks that we needed this program, but once we did our due diligence and understanding it is a need, it actually is a scientific, complicated endeavor that takes really technical training, and the demand for brewers is there, particularly in the South. And then seeing that happen and then bringing my first class in, it's going to be like having 15 kids and we're sending them away. So it's going to be really, really cool to see that.
All these big breweries are moving out to the East Coast. You got New Belgium, Sierra Nevada, Stone is looking to come out here. So the time is right here. Everyone else is already doing their own thing. So for the Southeast and the East Coast to get into it, it's a good time.
The first brewing class has graduated. The students even crafted their own special brew. It's called Classic IPA. You can try it out at Saltworks Brewery in Knoxville. Thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you can get out and enjoy your Tennessee life. I'm Vicki Lawson. See you next time.
Tennessee Life is sponsored by Next to New, an upscale consignment shop serving Knoxville, nexttonewknox.com, and by The Flower Pot, for over 100 years, offering flowers and same-day delivery with 2 convenient Knoxville locations, knoxvilleflowerpot.com.